and welcome to all, to everyone who's joining us, whether it's from places where you're in the morning, afternoon, evening. Lovely to have you here. And hopefully you should start now seeing my screen, which should have a picture of Hodge, almost our host in absentia for today's talk. Well, welcome to the wonderful world of clerical cats. The cathedrals of Britain currently appear to be overrun with the paw prints of cats, but as this talk will show, this is nothing new. And I'll start by introducing Hodge, current cathedral cat of Southwark Cathedral, who's been in office officially since the 6th of December 2020, even though he'd been rambling on the cathedral's stone tiles for a few months earlier. The previous incumbent to the post was the late Dawkins Magnificat. Dawkins turned up on a cold night in December 2008 and just didn't leave, and she quickly became greatly loved by the clergy, staff, members of the congregation, and visitors. I remember seeing her snoozing on a chair by the altar when I visited Southwark Cathedral. She retired in 2019 and passed away in 2020 and was honoured with a memorial service. And here is Dawkins inspecting a stone corbel for the cathedral, carved in her likeness. But resident cats have been and still are a feature of many cathedrals. Meet Budge of Norwich Cathedral. So some of these cats, they arrive when their clerical owners are appointed to the post. Others just turn up, won't leave. And some are technically supposed to reside elsewhere, but just prefer living in the cathedral. Here's Badger of Durham Cathedral, who sadly has recently passed away. Panga, named after Pangaban, of which more later, of Wells Cathedral, and this is a particularly magnificent photograph of Panga. And previously, Wells Cathedral was dominated by Lewis, here in his favourite basket in the cathedral's gift shop. In 2015, the 17-year-old Lewis was accused of attacking a small dog, and the owner's witness statement declared that, quote, "This dangerous semi-feral cat pounced like a wild lion in the jungle on my dog Millie's head." Here is the wild lion in the jungle, Lewis. Salisbury Cathedral has had a long reputation for cathedral cats. Here are the current incumbents that meander around. Here's Thomas, the cat of Portsmouth, and Gerald, York Minster cat. And he was a cat who supposedly had a home elsewhere near the cathedral and just decided to move in. He preferred the Gothic stonework. During the pandemic and lockdown, 3 cathedral cats have become rather famous. And these are Leo, Tiger, and Lily of Canterbury Cathedral. And this is due to their antics during daily morning prayer that was done by Dean Dr. Robert Willis in the cathedral gardens outside and broadcast to the world. Because what happened was that the cats kept stealing Dean's milk, dipping their paws in, stealing pancakes on Pancake Tuesday, sneaking under the Dean's cassock, creating all kinds of mayhem. Elsevier, the cat of St. Canice's Kilkenny's in Ireland, who died in 2019. And here he is on the tomb of Pierce Butler, Earl of Ormond, and his wife. Calcifer, being a black cat, is particularly suited to Kilkenny, since Kilkenny is actually the first ever site of an accusation of a cat familiar, when Dame Alice Keitler was accused of having a big black furry feline devilish succubus in the early 14th century. Exeter Cathedral has a fine tradition of cathedral cats, medieval and modern. Here is Stapledon, the current incumbent, and he's actually using a 16th century cat hole that was carved under the cathedral's clock door. Now, the cathedral accounts for Exeter between 1305 and 1467 attest payments of 13 pence a quarter, which is approximately a penny a week, quite a lot of money, for the custas and the cats, and this appears in the Latin as custoribus et cato. And there's also occasionally payments of a penny a week just for the cat, and it's listed as pro cato. Presumably, this was for cat food for the resident mouser. And between 1363 and 1366, the payment actually doubled to 26 pence a quarter, so 2 pence a week. So either there was one cat who was eating a lot of food, or maybe there were 2 cats on the payroll for those years. Now, Christchurch Cathedral, Dublin, has the remains of 2 previous residents, and these are a very old cat and mouse that got stuck in an organ pipe and died, and their remains are exhibited at the cathedral, and they're quoted in James Joyce's Finnegan's Wake, where he talks about, quote, as stuck as that cat to that mouse in that tube of that Christchurch organ. And, sorry, yes. And down the hierarchy, here's the tombstone of Tiddles, the church cat between 1963 and 1980 at St. Mary the Virgin in Fairford. And thanks to the internet, there's been a few celebrity clerical cats, apart from our cathedral cats, like Hodge. Here is Lewis, the vicarage cat, whose vicar owner posts on the social media site Twitter videos of Lewis singing, and I do put that in quotes, hymns and secular songs. But mayhem can happen, and this really is the criminal of the clerical cat world. This is Pips, the church cat of All Saints Church, Ilkeston in Derbyshire. And here on the left, you can see him just after he's thrown baby Jesus out from the manger in the church's creche. And Pips has a reputation for walking along the church's organ pipes. She meows during weddings and baptisms, and she's been banned from attending funerals because she likes to jump on the coffins. And so unspoilt clerical cats, in literature, P.G. Woodhouse's short stories, The Story of Webster and Cats Will Be Cats, specifically talk about spoiled cats of a bishop. In the story, Lancelot Mulliner, a young artist, receives custody of the cat of his uncle, the Dean of Bolsover, and the cat arrives in a straw-lined hamper, and the instructions are that Webster, this clerical cat, can only have cream at midday and fish no more than 3 times a week. And P.G. Woodhouse describes this clerical cat. Webster was a very large and very black and very composed. He conveyed the impression of being a cat of deep reserves, descendant of a long line of ecclesiastical ancestors who had conducted their decorous courtships beneath the shadows of cathedrals and on the back walls of bishops' palaces. He had that exquisite poise which one sees in high dignitaries of the church. And in the stories, young Lancelot Mulliner's life is tormented by this clerical cat because it really wants to keep him on the straight and narrow. So clerics and cat have had a complex relationship. Here, the pages of a 15th century manuscript made of parchment have been visited by the paw prints of a cat. Here again, we can see cat paw prints on parchments and on a church tile. Here on the left, in this 12th century manuscript, there's actually what looks like the signs of a struggle. You can see how the paw prints have actually been slightly smearing on the page where the clerical owner was trying to push the muddy paws off his valuable book. And true disaster can be found here, which is in a page in a manuscript written by a monk in the monastery of Deventer in the Netherlands in 1420. And he was copying out text on this page, and he left it to go to sleep. And the next morning, he wrote exactly and drew a little picture of a cat of what had happened. And this is what he wrote, translated from the Latin. Here is nothing missing, but a cat urinated on this during a certain night. Cursed be the pesky cat that urinated over this book during the night in Devonshire, and because of it, many other cats urinated too. And beware not to leave open books at night where cats can come. Wisdom for the ages. And you can actually see almost if you look carefully, the urine stain, which is just below the little picture of this peeing cat. And in the medieval period, there's a strong association between cats and clerics and those in monastic orders. Here is Mite, who appears in the margins of the 13th century accounts of Beaulieu Abbey. And it's quite a rare case to have a name for a specific name for an individual cat, since most of the references to medieval cats that I've found just call them the cat, or there'll be a name such as Gilbert, or Tybert, which are generic names for tomcats at the time, just like we call Tom to a male cat. In medieval England, they would call a male cat Gilbert or Gib. And here, this is a translation of a very famous old Irish poem, Pangaban, and it was written at the bottom of a 9th century manuscript, which you can see the arrow points to where it starts, by an Irish monk in Reichenau Abbey in what is now Germany. And it details the actions of his feline companion, that while he is writing at night, hunting mice is his delight. And more on monks and cats. St. Brendan, in one of the Latin lives of the saint, St. Brendan is traveling in a boat far to the west of Ireland, and he comes to this island, and he and his party in their boat are attacked by a very aggressive black sea cat, which tries to eat St. Brendan and his monks, and they basically have to repel this giant cat with their oars. And they manage to get ashore, and there's just one monk, a local monk who's living on this island, and he explains to St. Brendan and his brothers about this cat. And he says that long ago, we came in a boat to this island with our very friendly, lovely cat, sort of Amabilium, and he grew very large from eating the local fish. However, sort of Jesus Christ, our Lord, has never allowed it to harm us. So that's fine. All these monks in these islands are just living with a giant killer monster cat who eats any other monks who might turn up. And the idea is that because the cat ate the local food, he therefore got incredibly fat and monstrous. So as a top tip, if your cat offers you salmon for free, don't eat it. Everyone just wanted cats. And on Franciscans, Salembine de Adaume, who was a 13th century Franciscan chronicler, he complained about his fellow Franciscans. He said they just like lazing around, playing with cats, little dogs, and pet birds, and not like St. Francis, who wouldn't be doing this stuff. He'd be playing with more suitable wild animals like pheasants and cicadas, and not just pets. However, cats managed to get under the radar when the Franciscan General Chapter of Narbonne banned Franciscans from keeping pet dogs, but cats were allowed in. And we'll see this throughout the Middle Ages, that you could get away with keeping cats when often other pets were banned, partly because you could excuse it by saying the cat's working as a mouser, it's got a job to do. St. Dominic, founder of the Dominican order, had some trouble with cats, and here he is letting some Cathars, a heretical sect in southern France, he's telling them that they are actually secretly worshipping the devil in the form of a cat, and here is the devil as a cat making its escape up a rope, and this is a gross calumny against cats and Cathars. But other Dominicans had more positive things to say about cats. Albertus Magnus, the great 13th century Dominican scholar, said that cats take great delight in cleanliness, and for this reason they imitate the washing of a face by licking its front paws, and then by licking it, smooths all of its fur. This animal loves to be stroked lightly by human hands and is playful, especially when it is young. And Thomas of Cantimbre, who possibly gives the earliest reference to purring, in which he says that cats delight in being stroked by the hand of a person, and they express their joy with their own form of singing. Pets in general, like dogs, squirrels that were widely kept as pets in the period, were banned in many nunneries, or either by the nunnery's own rules or on the order of a local bishop or archbishop after he'd visited them. But the number of bans attest that pets were widely kept, and as a rule, cats usually aren't listed under banned animals. And this ban from Languedoc, the nunnery of Languedoc in 15th century Saxony, is quite rare, when it specifically says you can't keep cats and dogs because they distract from seriousness, because normally this was only an accusation said against pet cats. And here in these beautiful mid-18th century tiles in Naples, a nun is feeding an entire army of cats. There could, however, be a bit of a confrontation between all the pets of nuns. And this is from the early 16th century poem Philip Sparrow by John Skelton, in which the narrator of the poem, Jane Scroop, who was a schoolgirl living in the Benedictine convent of Carrow in Norwich, she laments that her pet sparrow Philip has been eaten by the nunnery's cat Gib, that is the tomcat. And she cries out in the poem, "I wept and I wailed, the tears down hailed, but nothing it availed to call Philip again, whom Gib our cat hath slain. Gib, I say, our cat, worried her on that, which I loved best, it cannot be expressed." And cats could be, for some nuns, an occupational hazard. And this is a record in a 15th century register that attests that a prioress at Newington Abbey was actually suffocated in her own bed while she was sleeping by her cat, which things to be warned and careful about. Anchoresses in the Middle Ages were women who had taken a vow to be enclosed in a small annex of a church so that they could pray intensely. And they were specifically allowed in the 13th century Ankrine rule for anchoresses that they could keep a cat, but no other animal. Ni schullen haben na beest but cat anne. So you can only keep a cat. And there's no medieval evidence whatsoever that the anchoress Julian of Norwich herself kept a cat. But nevertheless, due to this association of anchoresses with cats, she's often portrayed with a cat in modern iconography, as you can see in these two stained glass windows in Norwich. So yes, there's no evidence she had a cat, but I think the logic being, well, she could have had one if she wanted to. And this logic happens a lot in the medieval and early modern period. The 14th century cleric and author Francisco Petrarch, he was actually a dog man, and he writes a lot about his pet dogs, and they're usually quite large specimens that his friends offload on him when they don't want them. However, artists began to portray him with little dogs because they thought, well, if you're a poet and you're going to be sitting writing stuff on a desk all day, you don't need a big dog. And then by the 16th century, there was actually a mummified cat in his house in Aqua Petrarca that was shown off to tourists as Petrarch's cat. And it's still here, which you can see, and I took this photo when I visited Aqua Petrarca. And below there's a jolly 16th century poem in Latin that claims that this was Petrarch's cat and that it helped fight off mice while he was writing poetry, and he loved the cat dearly, and it was his second Laura. all made up in the 16th century. Petrarch's not a cat owner. Perhaps the most famous clerical man who didn't have cats, even though almost everything you will see in print and on the internet claims he did, was Armand Jean de Plessis, Cardinal Richelieu, French statesman and cardinal in the early 17th century, and a leading character in Alexandre Dumas's novel, The Three Musketeers. There's no contemporary evidence whatsoever testing Richelieu as a cat man. I've only found references to his hunting hounds, some hawks, but no cats. But in the 19th century, French historiography began to portray the cardinal as a devious, behind-the-scenes mastermind, and this was the kind of man who really should have a cat. And so fiction, which is often repeated as facts, include myths that he only kept kittens and then killed them once they got bigger. You'll also see regularly in books and on the internet a long list of cats he supposedly owned with exotic names like Ludovic the Cruel, Pyrameus and Thisbe, Lucifer, Peruke, and Gavroche. All false. These lovely 19th century images showing him with cats. He didn't have one. And really, no 19th century French historical painting of the cardinal is complete without cats gamboling around. And here on the left, they're actually sitting on the plans for the siege of La Rochelle, where sort of French Huguenots were under siege from royal forces. The only 17th century French statesman who was really fond of cats is actually Louis XIV's finance minister Colbert, who always had a couple of cats running around his office. The association of evil, clever mastermind with cats continues to this day. Here, in the 1930s film, The Three Musketeers, the cardinal, played by Vincent Price, is holding a tabby, and this is a tradition kept up by James Bond's nemesis Blofeld with his white Persian and Don Corleone in The Godfather. Continuing the theme of never had a cat, but he was a cleric, so should have had one anyway, Henry VIII's Chancellor, Cardinal Wolsey, has a cat by his feet in his statue that was put up in 2011 in Ipswich. Like Richelieu, there's no contemporary evidence whatsoever of cat ownership by Wolsey. But again, there seems to be a consensus through the century that if you were a great prelate and very clever, you really needed a cat. And this seems to be happening even in the 15th century. In this painting of St. Jerome in his study by Antonello da Messina, now in the National Gallery, the saint and great Bible translator has his lion, which he is famously associated with, is there in the back on the right. But if you notice, just near the desk, there is a grey cat snoozing. Because after all, how can you write anything without a cat companion? Same logic here when this artist decided to paint St. Mark for this circa 1500 Book of Hours. He decided St. Mark needed a cat to help him write his gospel. And in this early 16th century Book of Hours, the artist has added a stern cat looking at St. Matthew as he's writing his gospel. And that cat definitely has the look of that St. Matthew should hurry up and feed him some dinner. Anyway, after a digression of people who didn't have cats but should have had one, here's one who did, William Laud, Archbishop of Canterbury. And he, the sort of later antiquarian John Aubrey, talks about how Laud was presented with what he calls Cyprus cats, our tabby cats, which were sold for £5 a piece. And John Aubrey talks about how that what was up to then the usual English cat, which would be a grey tabby with a mackerel pattern, was by this time starting to get replaced with brown tabbies with more a blotched fur pattern. And these tabby cats, Cyprus cats, were beginning to become very fashionable at the time since the 15th century. And they were imported from Damascus, from Syria, via Cyprus, then Venice, and then across Europe. And this international trade in brown tabby cats is attested in the name for tabby cats in various European languages, in Dutch it's the ciprese cat, in Italian the gatto suriano, the Syrian cat, which is actually the most accurate to the origins of the brown tabby. Spanish, the gatto romano, so coming from Syria, Cyprus, Italy, then into Spain. And the English name tabby cat actually isn't a reference at all to this international trade. It's actually to do with the coat pattern, because there was a type of brown striped silk which was known as tabby silk, because it was exported from Baghdad, from a district called Al Atabaiya, and that's where we get the name tabby. So here's some references to the Syrian cat craze in Venice, in monasteries, in which a brother Paolino in the monastery of San Antonio in Venice is telling an Italian noblewoman that he can get her some Syrian cats if she wants some. In another case in 1498, where the brothers of St. Nicolo had their cat stolen because it was such a luxury, fabulous item. Everybody wanted a nice Syrian tabby cat. And cat mania is attested even in the highest places. Despite what's been written in some books and on the internet, there were no medieval papal bulls against cats. And rather the opposite. The Vatican usually has been a very pro-cat place. When Pope Pius VII was visited by Caroline of Brunswick, the Princess of Wales, her husband was the Prince Regent, in 1815, there was a great effort to scoop up all the Pope's pet cats and get them out of the way in time just before she walked into the room, because she declared that she hated cats, so everyone had to get rid of the cats super quick. And the next Pope, Leo XII, lived a very austere life, apparently dining only on polenta, but he was mad on cats. And on his death, his cat Michetto was inherited by the French ambassador to the Holy See, Francois René, Vicomte de Chateaubriand. And Chateaubriand himself was a huge cat fancier. There was a reason why the Pope said, you will inherit my cat, because Chateaubriand was mad on cats. He writes about them all the time. And Chateaubriand then took Michetto back to Paris, and he describes Michetto in the following way. My companion is a large grey and red cat banded with black. He was born in the Vatican in the loggia of Raphael. Leo XII reared him on a fold of his white robe, and I used to look at him with envy when, as ambassador, I received my audiences. The successor of St. Peter being dead, I inherited the bereaved animal. He is called Michetto and surnamed the Pope's cat, enjoying in that regard much consideration from pious souls. I endeavor to soften his exile and help him forget the Sistine Chapel and the vast dome of Michelangelo, where far from earth he used to take his daily promenade. For some reason, today cats are not welcome on Vatican precincts, and this must have been a great hardship for Benedict XVI, who was greatly devoted to cats. Deprived of their company in his own personal quarters during his papacy, he made up for it whenever he was outside. In the words of Cardinal Tarcesio Bertone, every time he met a cat, he would talk to it, sometimes for a long time. The cat would follow him. Once, about 10 cats followed him into the Vatican, and one of the Swiss guards intervened, saying, "Look, Your Eminence, the cats are invading the Holy See." Perhaps they should have just let them in. Or perhaps best put by Cardinal Roger Mahony, the street talk that the Pope loves cats is incorrect. The Pope adores cats. Fortunately, now that he is retired, as Pope Emeritus, Benedict XVI can have as many cats as he wants. And here on the left are Zorro and Contessina, who share his retirement. So I've hoped I've given you in today's talk an overview that cats really belong in the church, because they really have been there for a long time. Here we can see in this 15th century illumination of the birth of the Virgin, in which the illuminator decided what you need in the scene is a cat sitting by the fire, licking its paws. Again, here during the birth of John the Baptist, while all the important events are happening in the background, in the foreground, the pets are enjoying their dinners. As a dog gnaws on a bone, meanwhile, the cat seems to be enjoying a nice bowl of milk. Here we have an Annunciation with a tabby cat, which, when this was painted in 1534, would have been one of those exotic brown Syrian cats, very expensive. £5 is how much Archbishop Laud was paying, which was a tremendous amount of money. And here you can see the cat's being terrified by Archangel Raphael turning up for the Annunciation. And of course, a Last Supper completely covered in cats. So I've hoped today that you can have an overview of cats everywhere. And so on that cheerful point, I will just stop sharing my screen, which I don't seem to be able to do it. Let me just see. Okay.
Thanks, Kathleen.
Yes, I'm there.
Brilliant. Right, if anybody wants to put any questions into the chat, I will ask Kathleen those questions, or she can take a look at them too as well. Let's see if anybody's got anything. I'll ask a question actually. What's your favourite thing that you've found? What's your favourite cat in an illustration, in a manuscript?
I think I particularly sort of like them when almost they shouldn't be possibly the one that I showed of St. Matthew with the very bad-tempered cat in the background, because normally in most illuminations the cats are quite well behaving, so I like the idea of a very grumpy cat there in the background. It's also quite common as an iconography theme that you'll have a cat fighting with a little dog. And so you might see images of, for example, the Annunciation, and where in the middle of the action at the Virgin's feet, there's a little cat and a little dog having a fight.
Lovely. I've got a question down here. How did cats become associated with witchcraft? Like, how if there seems to be a lot of stories about cats in the church?
This is probably I shouldn't want to say we should probably do an entire talk on this fact, but we could do an entire talk on that. But actually, it's been very much the cat witchcraft connection has been quite over-egged. Basically, there are references, like, there were in the medieval period occasionally references to sects of heretics worshipping the devil in the form of a cat, but this did not actually affect how people treated cats. It was just commented, so that's a connection with heresy. There's occasionally, by the late Middle Ages, you get references in continental Europe to witches transforming themselves into animals, and these animals might be a cat, but a witch can transform herself into a badger or a fox. A cat that it's not really seen a negative. In England, there's the unique case of familiars. You only really see familiars in the British Isles, and that's in the case where, in part of the pact that the witch is supposed to make with the devil, she gets given a demon that then that helps her out and might actually instruct her, and this demon often has an animal form. But again, even though they are cat familiars, there's also dog familiars, there's snail familiars, bat familiars, weasel familiars, and the fact that, yes, it's true, if you go through the lists of familiars in witchcraft trials, there's quite a lot of cats, that's partly because it's a very domestic animal. It's the kind of thing that if you're going to get accused with who is your familiar, it's probably likely to be a cat or a dog. But actually, there is not a huge, the idea that cats are being specifically targeted is not true in this time, and it's very much quite a 19th century. I don't want to say, let me blame 19th century history, because I did that for Cardinal Richelieu, but it's very much this sort of 19th century idea of witchcraft being anti-cat. It's not really that fussed about cats.
I've got another question here from the list. You mentioned the mummified cat found in the organ pipes, and we know there are mummified cats in other buildings, but are there more examples found in churches?
I'm not very sure. I think that one's sort of quite famous. There might be in places, how can I say, a sort of a church, they might be hidden and not found. There's also the case of in buildings where it's not completely uncommon to find cats, the bodies of cats that have actually been bricked up there by builders, by medieval and early modern builders. That has happened, but I've not seen that so common in churches. That case is more with secular buildings. But I think those are the ones I know, the mummified cats, and also the sort of mummified purposeful tourist cat, as I call it, of Petrarch. But I can't think, if anyone actually has found other sort of cat remains in cathedrals and churches, do let me know.
Thank you. I've got another question here. Somebody's written, it sounds like cats were a status symbol during the late medieval ages. When was the turning point when cats became more widely available?
Well, it's not that they're sort of status, they are widely available, and the average cat, if you saw a lot of the images, you will have noticed that for a lot of the medieval images, the cats are grey and stripy, and this really is the common cat. If you got a cat in the Middle Ages, that's the cat you would get, is a sort of grey with quite thin mackerel, as they call a mackerel tabby stripes. There are the brown blotched tabbies that you can buy from the 15th century that are very expensive, but most people are not buying their cats. In fact, it's actually very rare. It's almost, that's a case of sort of everybody wants these exotic Syrian cats, but you can just get often for free, or ask sort of just somebody who has a litter of kittens, you could just pick up a normal cat. Like there are cats of other colors at the time. There's references to, like, that people talk about black cats and ginger cats and white cats, but yes, most of the cats are grey and striped. And apart from the imported Syrian cats, I don't really find references to people buying cats. The expenses are normally for buying things for cats. So, for example, I found references to people buying cat blankets in Middle Ages, buying cheese for their cats, or buying milk for their cats. And you see this in the Latin accounts. But apart from the sort of between the 15th and the 17th century, when people are only sort of aristocrats and high prelates, I think, could afford to, or are getting these exotic cats. And generally, everyone could have a cat. Everyone could have a cat if you wanted one. And because they also work, how can I say, cats are supposed to semi-work as mouses, even though I'm not completely convinced, because my cat would have no idea what to do if he sees a mouse. Like, he's terrified enough of the squirrels on his tree. But yes, the idea that cats can also work as mouses, and you see this, for example, in 9th century Welsh law, in which cats actually have a value depending on how good they are at catching mice.
Thank you. Another question I have here is, why do you think it was acceptable for anchorettes to have a cat but not any other animal?
I think it's the anchoresses thing. I think, well, partly with the anchoresses is that they are being enclosed in actually a tiny, very small space. You are getting walled up till you die into this tiny annex of the church, and the idea is that you get food, sort of sanitary things. Buckets are put through a hole, food is put through there. So there's not much space you can, so you really would be quite difficult to keep another type of animal. But it gets back to this idea that cats aren't seen as so distracting as others, unlike other pets like dogs that might distract you. Meanwhile, a anchoress, who was a woman who was supposed to be devoted to prayer, she can just have her nice quiet cat there in the corner and he won't really annoy, unlike, for example, a parrot in a cage or a small yappy dog.
Another question I have here is there any general estimation of how much cats help with mousing?
Sorry?
Is there any general estimation of how much cats help with mousing?
I'm not very sure. You'd have to sort of, I know that there's been a lot, mainly work done in environment conservation studies of the amount of wildlife that cats destroy, particularly birds. And there's a reason why, for example, in places like New Zealand and Australia, there's worries about native bird populations getting decimated by people's pet cats. And so I don't know exactly in the case of how good are cats at mousing. I have seen historically discussions on whether you should feed your cat a lot. They were often authors would say, if you feed him a lot, well, does this mean he just won't catch mice? And other ones that, oh no, you should just keep feeding him a lot and he'll still catch mice as almost as a sort of, I don't know, amuse-bouche along with his food. So not there, but I'm not completely sort of sure. There are discussions where some medieval authors will actually describe how a mother cat trains her kittens to hunt mice, but how actually effective in real life cats are, and I'm sure any of the cat owners among the audience, which I greatly suspect is a large proportion of you, I'm sure all of you might have different ideas of how good your cats are at hunting or not.
Thank you. Another question I've got here is, in the medieval period, are there any references to pilgrims encountering cats when they visited shrines or churches with relics?
I can't think sort of specifically. So yes, it would be not uncommon to have sort of like, because there's actually lots of sort of medieval churches and cathedrals are often quite filled with animals. There was a sort of it was a reason why sometimes altar rails and other furniture was put to actually stop animals, dogs, cats, just getting a bit too close to the altar. So having animals roaming around the inside was not uncommon. I don't know of any references specifically of pilgrims encountering cats when they're visiting. It just might have been, perhaps it was such an ecstatic experience of the pilgrimage, you didn't just want to say, and there I was, there was just a cat there. Even though I remember when I saw, the time I saw Dawkins, she was sleeping about a meter from the altar, looking very peaceably in a chair. So perhaps, I don't know, in a sort of 500 years, somebody will find that a reference to people visiting cats very close.
Yeah. Well, thank you. I've got another question here. Is there reference to links with the Scottish wildcat in early records?
There are basically there are references to wildcats, but mainly because wildcats are hunted for their fur, because at the same time that people are keeping cats as pets and as mouses, there's actually also a trade in cat fur. And cat fur is actually one of the cheapest, was considered one of the cheapest furs you could get. For example, sumptuary legislation, which stopped people from different social classes wearing very expensive furs. So you could only be, perhaps, for example, only a viscount can wear, and above can wear this type of mink fur. Anybody could wear cat. It was seen as really cheap fur. And so yes, wildcats were being hunted for their fur. But there was also a case of people were stealing pet cats, and it's quite a theme in late medieval texts where peddlers kidnap pet cats and skin them and then sell the domestic cat skins to furriers. And domestic cat fur actually was sold at very low cost. Even wild cat fur was quite cheap, but domestic cat fur was actually half the cost. And this was partly because, and I hope this is not upsetting to too many people, when furriers try to assemble fur out of all these skinned pet cats, they aren't all the same color. So you got almost this coat of many colors look from the cats. And so it was very cheap fur. But there's an entire sort of tradition where people talk about, like, peddlers will come and steal cats. And the same Salambine de Adame, that 13th century Franciscan chronicler who complained about Franciscans keeping pet cats, he mentions that when Frederick II, Holy Roman Emperor, is besieging an Italian city, all the locals run away, and an enterprising furrier comes in and puts down food for everybody's pet cats, which he captures and then takes away, kills and skins, and everybody comes back and is horrified because their pet cats have been stolen by this furrier. So it was, how can I say, a hazard for medieval pet owners that you had to keep your pet cats away from furriers and peddlers who would want to kidnap them and sort of sell their fur.
Oh, thank you. Let's see, I've got another question here. What are your views on the various potential symbolic meanings of cats in religious art of all kinds?
This is, on the whole, I do find there's been a tendency a lot to see every time you see a cat in art as a negative connotation. And I think this is almost coming back on 19th century ideas of cats are evil, cats are devilish. Yes, it's true that, as I mentioned, there is in some medieval authors an association of cats and heresy, but there's other animals associated with heresy, bats, hedgehogs, by the way, and it's not completely straight cut. And often when I will see cats in iconography, I don't immediately start thinking, oh, that's evil, that must be a sign of evil. Often I interpret it actually it's a sign of domesticity. For example, the images I showed of the birth of the Virgin, in which there was a woman in childbirth, and then there was a cat either by the fire or eating food. It's very hard to interpret that as supposed to be a negative symbol. Instead, it's almost like part and parcel of domestic life. There was a table, there was a fire, and there was a cat. It's what you have. And for example, I have seen quite a lot of discussions on the iconography of the Last Supper, where some art historians are very quick whenever they see a cat to say, it's a cat, it's evil, it's probably association with Judas. But again, that can work, but then again, it doesn't work. For example, the last image I showed, which has about 4 cats standing under quite a few of the apostles, sort of thing. So come on, it's not just Judas, they can't all be evil. And similarly, the image of the cat and the dog fighting is again quite a domestic theme, that something serious is happening and the animals are completely ignoring it. So there's images of the Annunciation where Archangel Raphael is telling the Virgin Mary that she, and you'll see at the bottom there'll be sort of a cat and a dog completely ignoring what's happening, at this incredibly sort of important sort of scene. They're just having a fun by sort of tearing the fur of each other. So I'm usually quite skeptical on making obvious ones, because symbolism only works if there was a basis on it of how these animals are being kept at the time. And we know at the time that cats are being widely kept as pets in interiors, so we should not be surprised to see them in the imagery of the artists. It's the same way when we see dogs at the feet of effigies, and these are always interpreted as, it's obvious the dog's only there because it's a symbol of fidelity. But at the same time, this is a society in which huge amounts of people are keeping dogs as pets. So it can work both ways.
Cool, thank you. Another question here. Is there any evidence that people thought cats had extra sight and could sense things that humans couldn't, such as evil spirits?
Oh yes, there is quite an association of sort of cats and, for example, association of cats with the moon, that cats can see. Cat sight is often referenced by medieval authors, that they've got better sight, that they can see things and so on. And there's all that sort of things. And so sometimes, like, even humans can sense this. I mean, Erasmus of Rotterdam, he talks about how some people have almost this bodily antipathy to cats, and he says it's a bit like people who have an antipathy to cheese. And I probably won't go into, but terrifyingly, there was a big 16th century discussion about why do some people not like cheese, and it gets very philosophical, and people write entire books about why you don't like cheese. But he writes that some people just don't like cats, and he muses that this might be because cats are associated with the night, and they're very clever and they know their own way, and they've got their special eyesight.
Oh, somebody's asked a question about your earrings. I just spotted your lovely cat earrings you're wearing. They want to know where you got them from.
Yeah, these are the cat earrings. They come from a French company called Les Nereides, the Nereides. And so yes, they are little cats. And you'll be unsurprised to know that actually I have an entire collection of animal-themed earrings, but quite a lot of cats. Because speaking of them, I may as well introduce to everybody.
Oh, lovely.
This is Tommy, and I'm afraid I'm going to have to put him down because I don't really think he looks that thrilled about seeing us all. But yes, that is my little familiar and inspiration.
Oh, lovely. Right, I'm just having a look to see if there's any more. I mean, this sounds like another really big question here about how did cats become regarded as evil in the 19th century. So
that sort of things. I just think why there's often in the 19th century there's quite a push to see the Middle Ages as backwards and negative, and a lot of historiography, and almost this pushes the idea of my goodness, they thought they were horrible to animals, they're doing this, but without any evidence. It's the same thing, for example, in the 19th century starts the myth that in the Middle Ages they thought the earth was flat, when actually, no, everybody in the Middle Ages knows that the earth is round, and actually sort of have quite a sort of complex understanding of the planets and the rotation of the planets around the earth. So yes. I don't want to say I blame the 19th century for everything, but a lot of myths about the Middle Ages start there and still are with us.
Yeah. Right. I think that's all the time we've got for questions. I'd like to thank Kathleen for this wonderful talk, and it makes me miss having a cat now. And it's been lovely for everybody who's come along with all their different pets. Probably all of you will have joined via Eventbrite. If you have a look on there, I know some of you have asked about Kathleen's books. They're a lot of them are listed on there on the Eventbrite page in her biography. So please, go and check out her books if you want to know more about